Hello viewers, myself Dr. Anjali Singh, Assistant Professor, Chandigarh Law College, Mohali. Today, I am discussing with you the topic Administration of Justice and Courts during British India. Let me introduce the topic first. The judicial system in the pre-British era in India neither had any organization of formal courts nor established procedures. Administration of justice was basically in the hands of village panchayats, caste elders or zamindars in the Hindu society, whereas in the Muslim society, it was done by qazis. The administration of justice in India during the British period has served as the groundwork for the development of the contemporary judicial system. The Britishers gradually took control of the political and administrative machinery of India. In this process, they established a structured judicial system which was based upon the British legal principles. They fundamentally altered the traditional justice systems that existed in India. This lecture basically deals with the evolution of the judicial system during British rule. It will analyze the structure of the courts during the period and its impact on the Indian society. Now, I'll talk about establishment of Mayor's Court. The origin of codified law in India can be traced back to the year 1726, when the East India Company established Mayor's Court in Madras, Bombay and Calcutta. This was an indication of transition of company from a trading entity to a dominating force, incorporating new aspects in the judiciary. New challenges were posed by its expansion to the East India Company, and the company formally petitioned the king to issue a charter that would confer upon it specific privileges and authority. In 1726, King George I granted a charter to the company for establishment of Mayor's Courts in Calcutta, Bombay and Madras. But the jurisdiction of the Mayor's Court was under the King of England, not under the company. All previously established courts at Madras, Bombay and Calcutta were replaced by the Mayor's Court. The authority to adjudicate, resolve all civil cases, actions and pleas occurring in the three towns or within the factories of the company were granted to the Mayor's Courts. The court consisted of 9 aldermen, a mayor, with a condition that 7 of them, including the mayor, must be born British citizens. The aldermen were chosen from the prominent residents of the village and served in their position throughout their entire lives. The mayor was chosen from among the aldermen. The residents of the settlement were subjects to English law, regardless of their nationality. British law did not apply outside those settlements, and inside the areas, the Indians were governed by their own legal system. The Mayor's Courts, which were founded in accordance with the Charter of 1726, had significant restrictions. The company made significant attempts to follow English law, but there was a lack of clarity regarding its applicability. The extent of the Mayor's Court's authority over indigenous individuals was rather ambiguous. The Mayor's Court frequently vexed the locals by implementing English legal ideas, while disregarding their own custom and laws. It was in the year 1746 that the French took control of Madras, which resulted in the suspension of Mayor's Court's operations in the city. But in 1749, after the Aix-la-Chapelle peace treaty, French surrendered Madras to the Britishers. Again by the Charter of 1753, the Mayor Court was reinstated in the 3 settlements with similar powers. Jurisdiction, as outlined in the Charter of 1726, in order to stop conflicts between the governor and council, the charter brought the Mayor's Court under the authority of both the governor and the council. Rather than being chosen by the aldermen, the mayor was to be appointed by the governor and council. Now, let me introduce you regarding the reorganization of provincial courts and the establishment of the Supreme Court. The tenure of Lord Warren Hastings as Governor General from 1773 to 1785 brought substantial changes to the judicial system of British India. With the objective of consolidating and standardizing the judicial procedure, several reforms has been enacted. Prior to the Hastings, the British East India Company had implemented a system of governance that involved the administrators of the company to oversee revenue and civil justice matters, while local Indian rulers were primarily responsible for criminal punishment. In order to provide an organized judicial framework, he prepared the Judicial Plan of 1772 and instituted the Diwani Adalat for civil cases and the Faujdari Adalat for criminal cases. Mufsil Diwani Adalat, let's discuss it. This court was to address civil problems that fell under the jurisdiction of the collector. In this court, Hindus and Muslims were governed by their respective laws. These courts were responsible for adjudicating civil claims, which encompassed matters such as property disputes, inheritance, and contracts. The British judges were in charge of the proceedings, with the assistance of native assessors who offered guidance on issues pertaining to local customs and legislation. The Sadar Diwani Adalat, being the highest civil court in the province, was the next level of appeal from the Diwani Adalat. Now, let's go to Mufsil Faujdari Adalats. The purpose of its establishment was to address the criminal matters which were overseen by Indian officers with the assistance of Qadi and Muftis. The collector was responsible for the complete administration of this court. The court was administered Islamic law. The Sadar Nizamat Adalat, led by a Deputy Nizam and supported by the Chief Mufti and Qazi, granted sanctions for both capital sentence and the acquisition. These courts presided over criminal proceedings, encompassing offences such as theft, murder, and other grave transgressions. Originally, these courts were overseen by Indian magistrates known as Faujdars, but Hastings transferred their authority to British supervision in order to establish a more consistent system of justice. The Sadar Nizamat Adalat served as the Supreme Criminal Court under the supervision of Governor General and his council. Now, let's talk about the Supreme Court. In 1773, to manage the possessions of the East India Company, the then Prime Minister, Lord North, decided to introduce legal government, and the Regulating Act of 1773 was passed by British Parliament. Some important changes were introduced to the structure of the company. The Regulating Act of 1773 is regarded as the first attempt by Britishers to establish a regular government in India and to control the company. This act is also considered as the first step to create an independent judiciary in India under the British Crown's direct control. The Regulating Act 1773 empowered the British Crown to establish a Supreme Court of Judicature at Fort William in Calcutta. Under the Regulating Act of 1773, Supreme Court functioned as a court of record and with powers and jurisdiction comparable to King's Bench in England. The jurisdiction of Supreme Court of Calcutta included civil, criminal, admiralty, and theological proceedings. The entity possessed the authority to issue legal orders such as certiorari and mandamus, which are comparable to the jurisdiction of the current High Courts and Supreme Court. The jurisdiction of the authority extended to all British subjects and residents of Bengal, Bihar, and Odisha. It possessed the authority to adjudicate on matters related to criminal charges. Appeals from this court were heard by the King in Council in England. Now, let's talk about the defects of the Regulating Act of 1773. The Regulating Act of 1773 was an important step taken to overhaul the working of the East India Company, but it had major flaws. That it did not make any provision regarding the relationship between the Supreme Court and the companies' courts. Under this act, there was an overlapping of jurisdiction of Supreme Court and the adalats, due to which some serious conflicts took place between the council and the Supreme Court. Apart from it, the system of checks and balances under the act rendered the Governor General powerless in front of his council, and the executive's power was reduced on front of the Supreme Court. Now, let's talk about the establishment of Cornwallis Code. Lord Charles Cornwallis served as the Governor General of India from 1786 to 1793. His tenure is noted for significant judicial reforms that laid the foundation for a more structured and efficient judicial system in British India. These reforms, often codified under what is known as the Cornwallis Code of 1793, were aimed at reducing corruption, improving efficiency, and ensuring a fair administration of justice. The Cornwallis Code was a comprehensive set of regulations and laws designed to overhaul the administrative and judicial systems in India. It marked a significant departure from the existing practices and introduced several new principles and a structure. During Cornwallis' tenure, District Faujdari Court was eliminated and replaced with the Circuit Court, which was established in Calcutta, Murshidabad, and Patna. It serves as a judicial body that hears appeals for both civil and criminal matters presided over by European judges. He relocated the Sadar Nizamat Adalat to Calcutta and placed it under the authority of the Governor General and the members of the Supreme Council, who was supported by the Chief Qazi and Chief Mufti. He restructured the judicial system to create a multi-tiered hierarchy of courts that streamlined the process of administering justice. This structure consisted of several levels of courts. First, Mufsal Diwani Adalat, that is District Civil Court. These courts had original jurisdiction over civil cases within their respective districts. They were presided over by European district judges who were company servants. The primary function was to adjudicate civil disputes involving property, contracts, and personal matters among the local population. Second, Mufsal Nizamat Adalat, that is District Criminal Court. These courts handled criminal cases within the district. The judges were European officials, often the same district judges presiding over the Diwani Adalat. The courts deal with the criminal offences, including theft, assault, and other criminal activities. The third one, city courts. City courts were established in major urban centers to handle both civil and criminal cases. These courts were also presided over by European judges. They had a similar role to the Mufsal Court, but focus on urban populations. Then the fourth court, that is Court of Circuit. The courts of circuit had appellate jurisdiction over Mufsal Diwani Adalat and Mufsal Nizamat Adalat. They were presided over by senior European judges who travelled through the provinces on a circuit to hear appeal. These courts served as appellate courts for serious criminal cases and ensured a uniform application of the law across the districts. Now, the fifth one, Sadar Diwani Adalat, that is the Chief Civil Court. The Sadar Diwani Adalat was the highest appellate court for civil cases in Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. It was presided over by the Governor General and members of the Supreme Council. It served as the final appellate court for civil disputes, providing a higher level of scrutiny and ensuring consistency in judicial decision. Now, the sixth one, Sadar Nizamat Adalat, that is Chief Criminal Court. The Sadar Nizamat Adalat was the highest appellate court for criminal cases in Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. Similar to the Sadar Diwani Adalat, it was presided over by the Governor General and the Supreme Council. It handled serious criminal appeals and ensured the proper administration of criminal justice. Now, the last one, that is the seventh one, is the Supreme Court of Calcutta. The Supreme Court of Calcutta had both original and appellate jurisdiction over civil, criminality, admiralty and the matters related to church for British subjects and certain other categories within the presidency of Fort William. It was composed of a Chief Justice and the junior judges appointed directly by the British Crown. This court was the highest judicial authority in the region, overseeing major legal issues and ensuring the enforcement of British laws among British subjects and other specified groups. A significant step was the separation of revenue administration from the judicial function and the introduction of several British legal principles and procedure to the Indian judicial system, such as rule of law, equality before the law, emphasizing a more standardized and predictable approach to justice. Cornwallis reforms laid the groundwork for the development of a modern legal system in India. Now, let's talk about the codification of laws. The Charter Act of 1833, also known as the St. Helena Act 1833, changed the legal system of British India. This act attempted to centralize and standardize laws in British India. The Charter of 1833 established the first law commission under the chairmanship of Thomas Babington Macaulay. A comprehensive legal system for India was drafted by the commission, which produced the Indian Penal System 1860, Code of Civil Procedure 1859 and the Code of Criminal Procedure 1861. The Law Commission sought to standardize laws in all British territories in India. To reduce the legal discrepancies and improve legal coherence, the legislation gave the Governor General in Council legislative power over British India. Previously, the Governor General could only legislate for Bengal, Bihar and Odisha. The Charter Act of 1833 changed the judicial structure of the Supreme Courts of Calcutta, Madras and Bombay, as well as the Sadar Diwani Adalat and Sadar Nizamat Adalat. To streamline functioning of these courts and to ensure that their decisions are in consonance with that of laws and regulations of Governor General in Council, the Charter Act of 1833 sought to standardize British Indian law. With the effort of the first Law Commission, legal codes were codified to remove ambiguities and contradictions caused by varied local laws and practices. This move was intended to standardize legal proceedings and facilitate the administration of justice by British judges. However, this also created a language barrier for non-English speaking litigants, posing a challenge to their access to justice. The Charter Act of 1833 recognized the importance of legal education and training for both British and Indian judicial officers. Efforts were made to establish institutions and programs for the training of legal professionals, ensuring that they were well equipped to handle the complexities of the legal system. The Charter Act of 1833 laid the groundwork for future legal developments in India. The codification efforts initiated by the Law Commission eventually led to the creation of important legal codes that continue to influence Indian law to this day. Now, the other one, that is the Charter of 1858. The Charter Act of 1858, alternatively referred to as Government of India Act 1858, represented a pivotal moment in the governance of British India. The Indian Rebellion of 1857 led to the transfer of control of India from British East India Company to the British Crown. Through this legislation, this transition resulted in the implementation of several administrative and judicial changes with the goal of strengthening British authority and enhancing the effectiveness of government. and justice in India. The Charter Act of 1858 signified the conclusion of the East India Company's governance and transferred all its authority and obligations to the British Crown. The purpose of this move was to establish a more streamlined and centralized system of governments, which encompassed the management of the judiciary. The Charter of 1858 created the position of Secretary of State for India, a member of the British Cabinet with the responsibility of supervising the governments of India. This act introduced an important judicial reform, that is the creation of high courts in prominent urban centers. The enactment of the Indian High Courts Act in 1861, subsequent to the Charter of 1858, resulted in the establishment of high courts in Calcutta, Bombay and Madras. The high courts have superseded both Supreme Court and Southern courts, resulting in more streamlined legal process and a more effective appellate system. The high courts were granted primary authority in civil and criminal disputes, along with the power to review and decide on the rulings made by lower courts. The judicial changes implemented through the Charter Act of 1858 sought to amalgamate Indian legal customs with British legal tenets. The integration was imperative in order to enhance the acceptability and relevance of the legal system among the Indians. The changes prioritized the delineation of the judiciary from the executive arm of the government. The purpose of this separation was to safeguard the autonomy of the judiciary and minimize the impact of executive power on judicial rulings. The Crown appointed the judges of the high courts, who were required to function autonomously from local administrative officials. Then the next step in this development was the establishment of Federal Courts of India. The Government of India Act 1935 was one of the most significant legislative measures passed by the British Parliament concerning the governance of India. It introduced comprehensive changes to the administrative structure, including the judiciary. The Government of India Act 1935 established the Federal Court of India, which was a landmark development in the Indian judicial system. It was set up to resolve disputes between provinces and between the central government and provinces, and to interpret the constitution. The Federal Court had original jurisdiction in matters of disputes between the federal units and the central government, appellate jurisdiction over decisions from the high courts, and advisory jurisdiction to give opinion on legal questions referred to it by the Governor General. The Federal Court was composed of one Chief Justice and not more than 6 other judges. They were appointed by the King of England. The establishment of the Federal Court aimed to provide a central judicial authority and ensure uniformity in the interpretation of the Constitution and laws. The Government of India Act 1935 reaffirmed the powers and functions of the High Courts, which were established under earlier acts like the Indian High Courts Act of 1861. The act provided for the creation of additional high courts as needed, expanding the judicial infrastructure to meet the needs of the growing population and administrative divisions. High courts retained their original jurisdiction in civil and criminal matters as well as appellate jurisdiction over subordinate courts. The act aimed to ensure that high courts functioned as the principal courts of original jurisdiction and appeal within their respective provinces. The act introduced a degree of provincial autonomy granting provinces more control over their judicial affairs. Provinces could now legislate on certain judicial matters, giving them the power to make laws regarding the constitution and organization of their courts. Apart from the High Courts, the Government of India Act 1935 continued the effort to codify laws to ensure uniformity and reduce legal ambiguities. Efforts were made to streamline legal procedures and make the administration of justice more efficient. The Act reinforced the principle of judicial independence by ensuring that the judiciary operated separately from the executive branch of the government. Judges of the Federal Court and High Courts were appointed by the British Crown, and their independence was protected to a significant extent. The judiciary, though more autonomous, was still under significant British influence. The Government of India Act 1935 brought about significant judicial reforms that helped shape the future of Indian judicial system by establishing the Federal Court of India, expanding the High Courts and introducing elements of provincial autonomy. The Act aimed to create a more structured and efficient judicial system. The legal framework of India was profound, laying the groundwork for the eventual establishment of an independent judiciary in the post-colonial era. Therefore, it can be stated that the early Indian legal system was influenced by customary practices and religious texts, which gradually transformed from a secular legal framework and a common law. Now, to conclude, throughout the British era in India, the administration of justice evolved from rudimentary codes of the East India Company to a more structured and codified legal system. The introduction of various charters and acts in gradual manner developed a structured judicial system in India. Introduction of the Supreme Court and Federal Code, codification of laws, establishment of hierarchy of courts, and evolution of rule of law are the noticeable developments of this era, which become the basis for further development of the modern judicial system. This was all about today's lecture. Thank you so much.